Recording. Jai Baba friends, welcome to part 2 of Katie Rosa Hajar, our multi-named heroine, and her story. And this part, Baba enters the picture. So here we are at Monday, April 29th with Rosa, Jai Baba. Here you go, Rosa.
Jai Baba, everybody, welcome and thank you for being here. I appreciate your interest and support. And I was just thinking about Baba, and tears came to my eyes. And I thought, oh no, I don't want to start like that. But we'll get to that because I was lost in the wonderment of having this intimate life with Mayor Baba and how incredible it is. And can I ever do justice with words to convey that? But anyway, in the story, I've moved to Myrtle Beach and I got a job at the Holistic Health Center in Myrtle Beach as a massage therapist. And shortly after I was there, the chiropractor who established the center said he was going to have an open house for the public to meet us and see what we did. And each of the therapists should prepare a talk. And I don't remember how long the talk was, but it was not a 5-minute talk. It was some formidable amount of time that I had never done any public speaking. But, I started thinking about it and taking notes, and pretty quickly I was overwhelmed at all the possibilities and what direction to go. And I just said, Baba, this is getting too much already. I'm turning this over to you. I am going to open my mouth and we'll see what comes out. And I hadn't been a Baba lover for that long, so this kind of trust was totally unique at the time. So the night came and I spoke, and whatever it was, 15, 20 minutes or something. And I don't remember anything except that there was a lot of heat building in me. And I just kept talking and talking. And afterwards, one of the other therapists came up and said, that was really something. I wish I'd had a tape recorder. And I've never had that thought about anybody speaking. And I thanked him and I thought, I wonder what I said, because I didn't have any recollection. Baba really did take over, and that was a beautiful lesson. And then when I had gotten interviewed after I showed up initially, for the position, the chiropractor shared his philosophy that we would be a circle. And that was very pleasing to me. He was speaking my language, and I was glad of that. So somewhere down the road, not too long afterward, there was, I think, what they called a New Age exposition in Myrtle Beach. And he rented a booth for the Holistic Center. And prior to this, he had expressed his wishes at a team meeting that since all of us had our different spiritual and religious affiliations, we should keep the lobby neutral instead of bringing in, literature from our individual affiliations, which I totally agreed with, because it was just right. But at this holistic fair, he brings all his Southern Baptist literature and he lays it all over the booth. Like what we do is very much associated with that, which in fact it wasn't. I don't know why he did that. But at the next team meeting, I asked him why he did that after we had come to this group agreement, and he wouldn't answer it. And I was kind, but I was kind of insistent about asking him to be accountable for this breach. And he was getting really frustrated and then getting angry. And I knew that if I said one more word, he was going to get up and cross over to me in this circle and punch me. And I spontaneously, I don't know where it came from, saluted him. I went, "Yes, sir." And he kind of straightened up in his seat with his chest out and his chin up and said, "That's better." Well, some circle. Anyway, I could have been very impulsive and just said, "Who needs this?" And, quit. But that little voice, that wisdom speaking voice in my head said, "Why don't you go stay on the center for the weekend?" And I thought, yeah, that's a very good idea. So I was able to book into the guest house, which has actually been the only place I've ever stayed overnight at the center. And I always feel it's a great honor. And I was in Mary's bedroom and I had a dream. And the dream consisted of one image, a triangle or a pyramid, doesn't matter. I don't know what it was. And the voice in the dream said, "Okay, here's how it is. The chiropractor, he's at the apex, he's at the top, and the rest of you are at the base. It's not a circle. This is what it is. Now, can you live with that?" That was a dream. And I thought about it and I thought, well, what's important to me about my job here? And it was very clear that what mattered to me was working with my clients and serving them. So the next day I went, or Monday, whatever it was, I went in and I saw him. And I said something to the effect of that I wasn't going to give him any more trouble, that, in fact, he was the captain of the ship and his vote counted more than the rest of us because he had the responsibility and the liability. That's just how it was. And I said, it's fine, whatever you do. And I did have a very amicable relationship. There was no lingering tension between us, and I just concentrated on my practice. And one of the motivations might have been that I brought in the most revenue, and he probably wanted me there, but it didn't matter. It was okay. There was no tension going on. And when I left, he gave me a glowing recommendation. And as he handed it to me, he said, "Well, I haven't always liked you, but I have respected you." And I thought, I'll take that. So that was, a lot of learning. And I think it wasn't too long afterwards, I made my first trip to India. And living in Myrtle Beach, it didn't seem so daunting to go to India because it seemed like every week people were coming and going. And there were people to get advice from and tips and traveling companions. So this was in the mid 80s, maybe 86 or 7. I am a disaster at this point with time and sequence, but I'm going to tell you all the events and put it together as best I can.
Rosa, it
Yeah.
was 87 because you and I were roommates. That's when we met each other for the first time in 87. August. Yeah.
Okay, but I went again and I don't know what the 2 years were. I don't know whether it was 86, 87 or 87, 88. But, I don't know that it matters. But thank you for that, Betty. And I love the links and the connections and how they get picked up. So I must say, I expressed in the first video my feeling a lot of outsider to the mainstream of groups. And when I got to Maribot, I had that experience again, and it was like, oh my, because coming from where I did, probably my Jewish and Sufi mystical background, my concept of God was that God is great. And anything I would say about God was a reflection of the limitation of my mind and my understanding. And there had never been any experience of God in human form. And I was actually very content with that. I mean, I made friends with the great mystery, and everybody, it seemed that everybody I encountered, and I'm not making broad statements about Mehrabad and Baba lovers, I'm simply relating my experience in the moment, was that people were worshiping the historical Meher Baba, it seemed exclusively. Whereas I was very moved by Baba saying, I am not this body. Don't confuse me with this body. And, I put it on as a cloak. I'm sure all of you have heard that. And over the years, I mean, it really became clear to me what a blessing Baba came in that form, because he has appeared to me a lot in that form. And I have, like in dreams, and I appreciate, but at the time I was kind of like feeling separate again. And I didn't feel the connection with the Mandali that other people had. I respected them, and I saw what amazing people they were and the work they were doing. But I was there for Mayor Baba. And Baba was God realized, and the rest of us were works in progress. So I spent my time not going to shopping at the bazaar or Pune. I sat in a samadhi for hours every day, and I sat there alone. And I couldn't understand why, because the Pilgrim Center was booked to capacity, and I don't know where people were, but I sat there alone, day after day for hours. And Baba gave me no experiences. I understand that Baba knows how attached I get to experiences, and I like them, and he just didn't give me any of them. I later on asked him why that was, and he gave me a nice explanation. But there was an event that I can relate that was uh, quite powerful. I had heard about, Muhammad Must, and I got the impression that maybe he was a little unpredictable, maybe sometimes volatile. In any case, whatever it was, I didn't bother him. I didn't pester him or try to cultivate a relationship. I did hear that he liked chocolate. And one day I got some chocolate and I handed him the chocolate bars and then continued on my way. So that was the extent of my interaction with Muhammad Must. But sometime later, I'm walking past where he lived and he calls me over. So I go and he hands me this huge bunch of grapes. And of course, I was kind of floored. I was really stunned. And, in the Sufi world, the grapes are connected with wine, which is divine love. And so that Muhammad gave me this bunch of grapes took on a significance beyond a gift. It was very potent for me. And I remembered at the time how being a newbie at the Pilgrim Center at Mehrabad, the residents had impressed upon us, the new pilgrims, how important it was when you got fruit, especially from the bazaar and especially sticky sweet fruit, to take that to the kitchen so Alan could make it safe for Westerners. I think it was some kind of chemical treatment, I don't know. But it was like pretty emphatic that we should do this. So I had this bunch of grapes. And I knew what I was going to do, but there was a mischievous part of me that was going to do a little experiment. So I went around to the Western residents and told them the story about Muhammad and the grapes, and should I go to Alan first before eating him? And they all said, oh, definitely, very important. Yeah. Well, I knew I was not going to do that because my feeling was that this was a gift from God, gift from Baba through Muhammad. And the idea of dousing him with chemicals was so preposterous to me that I would never do it. But uniformly, I was told I should definitely do that. But the next time I went to Marizad, I went right to Mara's rose garden with my grapes, and I sat there ate the grapes one by one, saying Baba's name. And of course, I didn't get sick. So that was my first trip. And then I had the sense that even though I didn't get these, waves of love in the samadhi, Bobby had definitely worked on me. How could it not be? But it wasn't apparent. But when I got back, and I was um, attending these weekly classes where videos, this was when in Myrtle Beach, where videos from the Sufis had been recorded and they were sent week by week. And one of my friends, Baba lovers, was sharing them with the people in the community who wanted to see him. And and so I had this connection of listening to the videos. And then I found myself in this very strange, kind of distressing place where it seemed like, how can I say? I called it depressed, but it wasn't depression. It was more like I lost connection with everything. And I was wandering in this gray land, and I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel and what's going on. And everything that kind of excited me, and interested me, nothing was there, nothing was happening. And my friend asked me if I had ever heard this tape called The Experience of the Void, that had been made by Murshid Mackay. And I said no, and I was given that, and I listened to it. And what Murshid explained the experience of the void to be was, as well as I can remember and give you the gist of it, he said that for some people in certain lifetimes, they would finish their sanskaras. And what would happen is that a new sheath of sanskaras would unfurl. But the actual experience of the person this was happening to was they weren't aware of this. What they were experiencing was that the template for what had given meaning to their life prior to this lost feeling time was not there anymore. That was that feeling of being lost because nothing was there that had given meaning to the life. And the void was the experience, sometimes really long and difficult, of not being where you were, but not having fully arrived at the new place, the new consciousness, the new everything. And for some people, it could go on very long. For me, it was quite a lot of months. But what listening to this video, this tape, yeah, it was in the days of cassettes, I think. Listening to this cassette gave me was hope because I had no understanding that I might be in a spiritual process. I just thought I'd gone off the deep end and didn't know why, psychologically. And the idea that I might actually be in a spiritual process gave me hope there was going to be light at the end of the tunnel and maybe some, surprisingly positive benefits. So I was able to persevere left foot, right foot through all these difficult times. And I wrote to Murshid to tell him how grateful I was to have heard that tape and how helpful it had been. And we started a correspondence that actually continued for years. And he started sending me these beautiful oratorios that the Sufis had made. And things like that, but I had to go through everything because even though, I had this comfort in the tape, it didn't mitigate any of the pain, none of it. I just had to go through it. And he kind of kept up with me. I kept him informed about what was going on. And I think it took 9 months. And I dared to feel like maybe I was finished. But part of me thought, well, don't be hasty. The fire-breathing dragon might be around the corner ready to pounce. But then I felt really that I had. And when I wrote to him, he actually congratulated me on a successful journey, a very successful journey. And he said that that wasn't guaranteed. And I never asked him to explain, but what came to mind was the way different people will have what they call a Kundalini experience. And some people feel enlightened, and some people end up in the mental ward. So I guess things are not guaranteed. It's all sanskaras, in my understanding. Anyway, and he said it was a very difficult but necessary journey, and he was very glad that it had such a successful outcome. And I was different. I was different. A lot of things that had seemed to be seeds in my earlier life were now flourishing, especially in terms of creativity. It was an expansion. And I think Bob, see, this is what I think Baba was doing with me sanskarically when I wasn't feeling anything. He was working on these big changes. So then I booked another trip to India. And, with my massage practice, I had a lot of freedom in terms of schedule. And this second trip, one of the big events was that one day I found myself wandering up Seclusion Hill. And I had heard that it was, besides, Baba's seclusion place, it was also a crystal mound, and that there were loads of crystals and geodes. And I was well acquainted with the gemstone world, and I was kind of like a kid in a candy store. I just started wandering around Seclusion Hill, picking up all these quartz crystals and finding geodes. And I didn't realize that I wasn't just moving off the path laterally. I was actually going higher and higher, but I was so engrossed in what I was doing, I wasn't aware of it until I was like really near the top. And suddenly I realized from where I was to the top was a very straight upward incline, and I had no idea how to do that. And of all things, I was wearing Birkenstocks, and they didn't even have a strap, an ankle strap. I had no support. I had no traction. And I just sat there thinking, wow, I'm really in a predicament. I can't go down because I'm just going to slide and roll over, maybe break my neck. And I can't go up because it's so steep. And I sat there kind of catatonic for a little while, but I realized that I needed to take some action because otherwise I felt I'd get frozen and be unable to move. And I tell you, I don't know what happened. I was just sitting there and maybe I closed my eyes. But the next thing I know, I was standing on the top of Seclusion Hill. And it gives me the chills every time I think about it. This year is the first time I've talked about it. It was so amazing, and I kept it so close to my heart that I just didn't share it. But there I was, and I just kind of took it in my stride. I looked for the path, and I walked down Seclusion Hill, making sure to stay on the path. Oh my gosh! And the other thing that happened was that I had no idea when I booked the trip that the Sufis were going to be coming, and this was the first time in many years there had been that long hiatus where there wasn't much communication between the community and the Sufis. And there was one Sufi who came early, and she was sharing a lot of stories, and this uncanny thing happened, which was that, well, the first thing that happened was I was in Merazad, And I didn't know the Sufis were coming. Maybe I knew they were coming now, but I had no idea about their itinerary and when it would be. But all of a sudden, Mercer Jim is there and he comes over. I don't know if I even knew what he looked like. And he introduces himself. And there was this big explosion of white light, which up to that point I'd never experienced. And that was it. He wandered off and said hello to other people. And from that moment on, what would happen was that, I mean, there was some old connection. It was really very strange what went on. Everywhere I went, and I had no schedule, so I would be here, there at different times on different days, and I would run into him. And one day I did go to Pune because I had some business. I mean, I never went to Pune. But this one day I did, and I was with a friend, and I said at some point, let's have some lunch. I'm hungry. So there was a restaurant across from where we were, a few feet. And as I approached to the door, Mercer Jim is coming out. And then I was wandering around the amphitheater one time, and the Sufis were rehearsing, and Mercer was in the bleachers, is what I remember. And as I walked by, I kind of bowed and I put my hand on my heart. And I noticed that he raised his eyebrows and like, really? And then, he acknowledged the greeting and did the same. And I later found out, and I had no idea about this, that this was the classic greeting among Sufis. Where it came from was the ancient past, because I did not know that. And I guess, I mean, I hadn't sought out Murshid, but nothing happens by chance, clearly. And it became clear to me because one resident that had befriended me, although she generally didn't mess with pilgrims, she had confessed that she kept making friends with pilgrims who would then get on the plane and leave, and she just stopped doing it. But she really liked me for some reason. And then one day she calls me over and she said to me, if you keep hanging out with him, we can't be friends. I do not take well to ultimatums of that sort. But when I went home, I thought to myself, okay, so why is this happening? What am I supposed to learn from this? This is not random. And what came to me very clearly, very sharply, was that when you don't have a connection, you're actually veiled. If you don't have a connection from a teacher, you're veiled. And that's how it's supposed to be, because, you have your own path. And that when you are connected, you're just so grateful for that, spiritual connection that you don't really care what other people think. So anyway, I think I saw Mercer shortly after that. and in his feigned innocence, he says, "So, how are things going with you and the Western residents?" So I told him what he no doubt already knew, it seemed, and he smiled, and that's all. And then my trip came to the end, and there had been no discussion about anything to follow in the States. I mean, I'd never thought about it. I was just in the moment. But I was back for a few days, and I had reserved a massage room with a chiropractor, and he'd been holding it for all this time. And I think I'd been in India for almost 3 months. And I get a call from Mercer's secretary, and she says, Mercer would like to invite you out to Walnut Creek and be his house guest for a week. At first, I was so dumb, I can't believe it. I actually said, oh, but I just am starting this job. And then she kind of went, and I woke up and I said, yes, of course I'm coming. Of course I'm coming. So I came there and I was there in Mercer's home for a week. And there was one afternoon where he spent a lot of time just listening to my story, and which had a lot to do with what I shared in the first video about the tumor and all the effects and the miracles and the difficulties. And and then, with the meals, everything was run communally and cooperatively. Everybody had choice and participated. And I ended up on the kitchen detail. I think I selected it. I don't know. And I was on with the group that was making salads. And the instruction was that if you came across a lettuce leaf and it had a bruise, you should toss it in this big plastic garbage can. Now, I had just spent 3 months in India where everything is recycled until it disintegrates. And I was taken by surprise that rather than just removing a tiny little bruise, this was supposed to be discarded. And yes, there was kind of judgment going on, and I was watching it, and I thought, I don't want to be in that place. I don't like that energy of separation. And immediately my mind said, oh, yeah, what's the difference? It's just another dance in duality. And I knew it was so true. Nothing was absolutely good or bad, and it was just another dance in duality. And I completely shifted gears, and I had a wonderful time. Never once did I have any critical thought. So that was like a really great lesson and experience. And over the years, I did participate in a few different Sufi workshops in Washington and California. I was sort of like a friend of the family and a friend of Mercer's. I didn't want to be a member. I was with Baba, and I just wasn't pulled in that direction, although I enjoyed all the people very much and my participation. And then back in Myrtle Beach, very suddenly it seemed to me, it's sort of like in my life, I see what appears to me to be a new bundle of samskara shows up. And all of a sudden, I have this passionate interest in something that I may not have even thought about. Well, that happened with the Southwest in the United States. Suddenly, I would see a picture of like a Native American grandmother, with her turquoise jewelry or something. And I could feel my heart going, like, I really wanted to go out to the Southwest, that I knew that I was supposed to do this, but I couldn't find anybody to travel with me. And I really, for a long time, did not like traveling, especially long distances on the super slab. But anyway, I did what wasn't so comfortable. And I went to the Southwest twice. Now, the first time I went, a friend of mine from South Carolina asked if I would deliver a message to a friend in Phoenix. Fine, I had no itinerary. And Phoenix was a trip. I got off the highway and at a gas station asked where this address was. And the guy said, oh, it's 50 miles in that direction. I'd already been traveling all this time and I had 50 miles more to go. Anyway, I get to my destination and I deliver the message. And this woman, how shall I say, she was a nice person, but I ordinarily wouldn't have probably met her or been friends with her. And as I was kind of finishing up, she said, you're going to Sedona, aren't you? And I shrugged my shoulders, kind of like, well, not really. I hadn't planned it. The only thing at that time I knew about Sedona was that there was one guy who did regressions and I wasn't particularly interested. And then she says, well, you really ought to. It's what you're all about. And I thought, kind of strange coming from this woman I met, a few minutes ago. But that little voice, that wise voice in my head said, you never know where the messages come from. So I looked at the map and it was not a big commitment. It was a few hours drive. So I went up to Sedona, and it was really neat that I knew nothing about Sedona because I had this total beginner's mind. I had no expectations, no pictures in my head. And as I got my first glimpse of the red rocks, I started crying. Another thing I'd never done. And I'm just driving, saying, oh, thank you for bringing me to this place. And the tears are coming down. And I got to Sedona, and I went to a New Age information center, and I found a place to live, and it was a lovely house by the creek. And there were two couples, two of them were Sufis and two of them were followers of Yogananda. And one of the ladies was pregnant, and I was able to stay if I wanted until the baby came in the baby's room. Well, I did have a reading in the beginning, there's so many psychics. And the first thing this woman said, there was a whole very interesting way I connected with her because she had moved out of Sedona. But I was looking for her, and that day she showed up after not being in Sedona for a long time. So we made an appointment, like for the next day, to connect in this beautiful canyon. And she set up a medicine wheel. And the first thing out of her mouth was, welcome back. So, I was picking up these threads from my past, it seemed. And she said some interesting things, but I'm not going to go through that right now. What did happen, I don't know like when I arrived, but I remember it was Thanksgiving morning. I woke up and I was sobbing. I wasn't just crying. I mean, I was not a crier. I mean, this was such atypical behavior. I just want to make that clear. And what is going on is that there are waves of abandonment just pouring through me and over me, and I cannot stop sobbing. The funny part is that these people I lived with had lived in Sedona for a long time, and they were completely blasé about this woman who couldn't stop sobbing. And they said, oh, yeah, it affects people like that. Sometimes they come to the Sedona and the energies, you never know. But me, I wanted to wear a little name tag that said, hey, folks, I haven't always been like this. It was really something. And it didn't stop. So I just met a psychic somewhere, I don't know, walking down the street or whatever. I asked him, I said, am I ever going to stop crying? And he said, well, you've done what we call really good work on the psychological level, but now this is cellular memory release. And I got that. Okay, so this is a continuation of this deep work, this old stuff coming out to be looked at and released. But the sobbing didn't stop. And I knew then and there that I could not even imagine relocating at that time and trying to establish a practice in a normal life. It wasn't even a remote possibility. So I came back to Myrtle Beach. I left and I was still sobbing. It was the beginning of January. And I felt like there was maybe going to be a short visit and something that maybe just needed to be completed. I didn't know what. And I had had my stuff packed in boxes, and when I got an address, a friend was going to send it out. But when I got back after the second trip, I had a yard sale and I sold everything except what fit in my car. And in a way, um, it was cutting those lingering ties that were pulling me back to Sedona so that I could move into my next phase of life. That's what it felt like. And so off I go. I can't find anybody to travel with me. And this is really hard for me because I don't know where I'm sleeping at night. I'm ending up driving alone on the super slab. I had a few contacts. I didn't stay long. It was all kind of learning of no, not this, not this. No, this isn't right. And trying to find where I was supposed to land. And I get to Tucson and I stay with a Bible lover. And on the way, I'd seen a sign announcing the opening of a metaphysical bookstore. And I thought, okay, here I go again. I'm going to get, and there were free readings, and I decided maybe I could get some insight about what was going on in my life. Because I've been on the road for a while, and I wasn't getting any answers. That was it. And I was just staying in Motel 6 and all these other things. And so I go to the bookstore and I arrived kind of late in the afternoon and I signed up for a reading and I'm the last one. And the gentleman who did the readings was very kind. He stayed past the closing time because he saw I'd been patiently waiting. And I asked him, I said, I just left the Mayor's Center in South Carolina and I'm affiliated with Mayor Baba, but I just felt the strong pull to come out here. And I'm wondering what he thinks about it. And immediately Baba shows up he tells me, this guy, Baba shows up in his white sadra and he's holding a peace pipe and extending it out to me, beaming. And after the reading, the fellow thanked me so much for introducing me to Mayor Baba and his energy, and that he had never experienced anything so beautiful. So that was pretty special. Anyway, I didn't stay in Tucson very long. It was not here, not here. And I'm going up north. I know somebody who lives in Northern California. And I stay with her for a little while. I knew her from Sedona. And I know I'm not going to stay there, but every day, every morning, I think it was like so misty and foggy that there was no visibility day after day, and I couldn't set out except finally one day, the sun is out, and I made my move. And I'm heading towards the Oregon border. And I didn't know that it was such a high altitude and that there was going to be like a 6 or 7 mile mountain to descend. And it was very steep. I don't remember what the angle was, but it was really pretty steep. And they had just had a major snowstorm. There was one tiny little pathway cleared for tires going down. And that was it. And chains were mandatory. I had no chains. I also had no room to get out of the line because of the high snow piled on either side. And all I could do was apologize to the people behind me in my head and go so slowly for 6 or 7 miles down this very steep mountain. That was my introduction to Oregon. and it was pretty hairy, but it was uneventful once I got going and just stayed focused. And then I went to a Baba Lover's place in West Lynn, which is an outskirt of Portland, and I stayed there. And I had a little private place in the yard, so that was nice because there was like a lot of coming and going with people, and I had this quiet private space. And I knew I needed some structure because I'd had a very busy practice in Myrtle Beach, a lot of freedom within that, but I was very busy. And now I was really getting unhinged by not having any structure in my life and not knowing what I was doing and I was going. And the guy that I was staying with, he was doing this multi-level marketing thing, which I don't really resonate with at all. But that little voice again said, you need some structure, it'll be helpful. So I signed up under him, and what he was doing was selling Sprint. And the reason I could do it was because the rap was that Sprint was the only phone service that didn't use their money to support armaments the way AT&T did. So I would get dressed and I would go all the way to this really big health food store at the other end of Portland. And I guess being a New Yorker, I really can walk up and just talk to people. But I don't like sales, and I don't like that thing. So I would do it, and I'd come home, and then I'd cry and say to Baba, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do this? But in a way, it was grounding me. It was, but it was a challenge for me. And I had somehow met this lovely person who she and her partner had opened a woman's store in a town called Clackamas. And it was not on the map the way Portland was. I remember it as kind of dark and maybe undeveloped at this early point, but they opened a woman shop, and I liked this woman. And as I was riding down to the health food store along the Willamette, I came to the exit for Clackamas, and I thought, what would I like to do today? Hands down, I make the turn to go to the shop, and I'm standing in the middle of the shop looking at, the sculpture and the jewelry and the music and all this stuff. And Rob is in this shop run by two gay ladies. And he comes up to me and he takes my hand. Rob is my husband in the future. He takes my hand and he starts giving me a reading, essentially, reading my energy. So I said to him, well, if you're going to do this, why don't we leave the center of the store? Let's go find a piece of earth and sit down. So that's what we did. And from that moment on, he was like courting me. He lived up on Mount Hood, and he worked at the lodge, which was converted into a ski lodge. It was a beautiful place where they had handmade doors, and it had been one of those projects in the 30s. And he'd done many different things. Anyway, how I met him is very significant because it turned out that he was very challenging for me. I mean, he was really beautiful too. I mean, he had a generous heart. He'd come down with a double bouquet of flowers, and we would spend the day walking, and then he'd go back up to Mount Hood. And later on, I found out at that point he was the night engineer keeping the place running. And he would spend the whole day with me, then he would work his night shift, and then he'd come see me. It was like he never slept, but he never told me he did this. He would just keep trucking. And he had this direct knowing. And it triggered my sense of inferiority because he was very, I wanted to say, well, you're not so smart. You don't know everything. But in fact, I'd never seen an instant when he wasn't accurate. And my ego was very unhappy. But at the same time, I knew he was a very special person. And and at one point I said, I'm not sure whether it's my higher self, Baba, or whatever, but I said, do I have to do this relationship? Because, I was ambivalent. It was special, but it was very challenging. And what I heard was, this is not a vacation relationship. This is a work relationship. And if you stick it out, there will be great rewards. So that was the background to it. And we kept seeing each other, and then one day I went up to his place, and I was kind of nervous about, oh my God, if I had visited with a group of people, a male Baba lover's apartment where there was 3-week-old dirty dishes in the sink and nothing on the walls. And I thought, oh God, if I see that, I know I can't go on with the relationship. But it was exactly the opposite. It was so beautiful and harmonious, and there were all these beautiful things from nature and handmade. And Rob had no idea how artistic he was. He was an orphan, and he had ended up in the foster care system. He'd never talk in detail about any of those things, but he did say, I think the final straw was being with this couple that kept the children in the chicken coop. So he took himself off to the streets of Portland, and he actually grew up under his own uh, wisdom or whatever, and the tutelage of the Greek mafia. And so this was his parenting. But he had extraordinary things happen all the time, and he found that, like most children who have unusual gifts, it freaked out the adults. So he buried it. I mean, I'll just give you an example. He scored off the chart in an IQ test, and he was accused of cheating. And he really hurt his feelings. So he said, I didn't cheat. You give me the test again, and you sit in the room and watch me. So they did that. And the same result happened. And they said, well, we didn't catch you, but we know you cheated. So this is what he faced. And he dropped it for a long time. He dropped it for a long time. But he found himself very unhappy because being in the closet, he didn't attract people that understood him because he wasn't revealing who he was. So he said to whoever he said, I didn't ask him, that he made this vow that the next woman he became involved with would be spiritual and psychic. Now, I never thought I was psychic. I knew I was intuitive, but I heard from a lot of people. Even Adele Walken kept telling me how psychic I was. And I said, that's completely news to me. I was completely veiled. And anyway, I want to tell you, you know how I got to that woman's store, but I want to tell you how Rob got there. Because later on, I asked him how it came to be that he was in that store. So he had worked at the lodge, I think, for a long time, and he went up to his boss and said that he would be taking the next day off. And would that be okay? And the guy said, of course, Rob. But what's going on? And Rob said, nothing. I'm just taking a personal day. And he said, Rob, you haven't missed a day in 9 years. What's going on? He said, no, really, I'll be back. Don't worry about it. And he knew that the next day he was going to meet his soulmate. And he knew it was going to be at that store. And what he did was travel directly from the top of Mount Hood, 52 miles, straight to the store, waiting. And when I walked in, he he knew it was me. And I can't remember whether he told me that he looked at my heart or he looked at my soul. But Rob could see those kind of things. He was never fooled by people's exteriors. Now, my button was getting pushed, but the joke was the universe was pushing his buttons too. Because he later told me that he was a very laid back guy and a very generous guy who was always helping people. He was really love in action. And without tooting his horn, it was just like that's what life is about. You help people. And now I just lost what I was going to say. Anyway, we got together, and we were very well matched on an essence level. We had the same values spiritually, and I came to really appreciate that he was not a Baba lover, and I'll tell you why. Because when you're with somebody who's on a different path, you don't go through the day with Jai Baba-ing. You're either walking your talk or you're not walking your talk. You're either compassionate and understanding, willing to give in, whatever it took, or you're not. And we had a really good relationship. Very early on, we established that we were not there to make the other one over according to our ideas or values. And we grew tremendously in the 22 years that we were together, both individually and as a couple. We were like unrecognizable. It had been very beautiful development. And I want to tell you just one or two quick stories about Rob, and then I'm going to move on because I could talk for an hour and a half about how amazing he was. At one point, when he was working up on Mount Hood, the Dalai Lama came through with his entourage, and Rob, took care of filling the gas tank and everything. And Rob is like got long hair and a ponytail, wearing t-shirt, pumping gas. And after the limousine was filled up, the Dalai Lama took Rob aside and talked to him for 3 hours. At first, the bodyguard was stunned because, that can't happen. He would, with somebody getting too close. And the Dalai Lama just assured him it was fine. And the only thing that Rob told me, and I never pushed, it was his business. And if he didn't want to share it, I respected that. He told me that he mentioned to the Dalai Lama that he'd been in the Vietnam War, and he'd been really innocent and thought he was doing good, which he later found out the hard way was not what was going on. But he mentioned to the Dalai Lama that he had to do certain kind of terrible things to survive the war. And he was wondering if he had accrued a lot of bad karma. And the Dalai Lama assured him no. He said, my bodyguard will kill somebody instantly who gets too close to me, threatening, menacing. And there's no bad karma because he does it completely out of duty. And everything he said was what I later read in Baba's discourses about violence and nonviolence and aggression. And the interesting thing about Rob was that he had been living all of that because he told me that he loved the Vietnamese people. When he was in the jungle, and he said he didn't sleep for 2 years, more than 15 minutes, he was in survival mode. And he was the only one to survive, I think, 10 different, I'm not sure what the term is, units. And he stopped making friends because all his friends were like being blown up in front of his eyes, and it was a nightmare. But he said that he loved the Vietnamese people, And every chance he had, he would go into town and he'd get his meals there. And he studied martial arts and meditation with them. So I think what saved him was that he had this ability to segregate what he had to do to survive, and it didn't leak into all the other aspects of his life. And he ended up counseling a lot of vets and helping them to recover and get back on track, especially a lot of Native Americans, because he became very involved in the Red Path. And despite his blue eyes and blonde hair, he became a pipe carrier. Anyway, I'll tell you one story that had to do with me personally. We were in the bank about our mortgage, maybe refinancing, and the banker wanted a CID. He looks at my driver's license and says, you know, this is 4 years out of date. I said, no, I've been waiting to get a notice that I need to renew it because it was good for 10 years. How am I supposed to remember? And I said, in New York, they send out notifications. He said, well, not in Arizona. So he says, no problem, go to the DMV. You'll take the driving test, maybe, and the written test, and it'll be fine. So I said to Rob, I don't want to take the driving test. I mean, I'm a good driver, but I haven't, for instance, parallel parked in about 15 years, not in Arizona. So he rolls his eyes and he says, okay. And he does whatever he does, and he says, you won't have to take the driving test. So the next day I go in and I take the written test, and that's fine. I pass that. And there's a woman at when I called, they said you will have to take the written test and it'll be up to the discretion of the person there whether you take the driving test. So I hand in the written test and she says, and now you'll have to take the driving test. And I'm standing there with my mouth open. Excuse me? And she repeats it. And I can't digest this because this has never happened. And out of nowhere, this woman comes over and she says to the woman who's seated at the desk telling me I have to take the driving test, she inquires like, well, what's going on here? And she says, oh, nothing. I just told this lady she has to take the driving test. And this woman, who was apparently her supervisor or a senior, says, no, she doesn't. And the woman looks at her quizzically, like, well, what do you mean? I just told her she has to take the test. And the woman says, I'm telling you, she does not have to take the test. And they go back and forth until the woman at the desk finally acquiesces because the other woman gets kind of like, I'm telling you, she does not have to take the test. And so the woman says, okay, you're done. And I get my license. So that's not a secondhand story. That was a personal story. And there are many more, but I'm going to go on with my life. So now part of the time, Rob and I had lived in Oregon, and then on a trip we went into places like Wyoming and Arizona, and I really got taken by wanting to move to the Red Rocks, and we did that, and I had my massage practice, and there were on and off Baba meetings, but not so much for a while. And yet I had a life with Baba. I had Baba's picture all over. And it was very interesting. In all those years, only two people had inquired, who is that? And there is a saying, a Sufi saying, the secret protects itself. And one of these two people actually was a friend, and she came to a couple of Baba meetings, and she started having this rash of Baba dreams. And she was so casual about it. I said, oh, people would die to have all these dreams that you're having. This is not usual. And I don't know, maybe that's all the contact she needed. Anyway, it was interesting, and you know, I'm not sure where to go from here. I knew it would, it's like I just can't talk about my life with Baba so easily. But anyway, um, at one point, I have to bring in that I've been very artistic, but I had never painted, never done any drawing, and I had kind of a complex about it. I became a clay artist, and there was a very good ceramics department down from where we were living up on Mount Hood. And I decided to start taking classes. And one day, and it was a basic class, everybody's making mugs and plates and teapots. And I was okay, but I was not talented the way I've seen potters just do magic on the wheel with the clay. And I got into hand building, and I was holding this clay one day and just talking and mindlessly working the clay, and it turned into this amazing earth goddess. And I'd never seen but one picture of an unearthed earth goddess, and this didn't look anything like it. And I started making these earth goddesses, and I was into Raku, and I was doing these masks that seemed rather shamanic, like bird heads with feathers, and everybody thought I was pretty weird because, I wasn't making all these mugs and plates, a little bit. But the teacher loved it. He really encouraged me. And one day, after we decided to move from Oregon to Arizona, this friend, I had decided that I would not look at any historical evidence that was unearthed about earth goddesses right from the get-go. I wanted to not do any derivative art. I knew that I could find that place in me because I had that connection with clay, something ancient. So I kept making the earth goddesses, but not looking at anything. But when I was moving, this friend, she brought a goodbye present, and it was a beautiful coffee table size book written by a woman very credentialed. I think she was head of the women's studies at Harvard. And it was called The Goddess Civilization. And what she would do is go to these remote places like, Uzbekistan, and I can't even remember the names, they were so unfamiliar. And what she unearthed was exactly clay figurines of the goddess. And she'd written this whole book with all these illustrations, and I'd been doing this on my own. And the way I had incised decorations into the clay was what these ancient women had done. And at one time, I spontaneously decided, oh, I think I'll put a bird head on it. So I started making bird goddesses as well as earth goddesses. I didn't know anything about bird goddesses. But when I got this book, the first thing I did was go to the index to see if there was a listing for bird goddesses. And there was. And there was, information and pictures, and they were carbon dated 15,000 years ago. So I had really linked up with, and they were very much the kind of decorations I did. I mean, mine had my own flavor, but they were definitely in the tradition. And I was doing this raku in the backyard, which entailed, I'm not going to go into the process, but there are beautiful glazes produced and a black clay body. It's not painted. The carbon goes into the clay body. And I think that in order to get these beautiful colors, they use heavy metals in the glazes. And there's a lot of noxious gases that are emitted in the process. And I didn't wear a mask. So at one point, I started hearing, I'm getting older too. And how this is done, it's not like you do 200 mugs and little sculptures, close the door, fire it, and hours later open it up and it's all completed. With Raku, you have a small kiln in the back, and you do 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, and you eyeball the whole thing. And you've got a propane torch, and you eyeball when the glaze is ready, which is typically 1850 degrees. So here I am messing with this torch in the back, 1850 degrees, and Arizona gets pretty dry at different times of the year. It's really a tinderbox. And even though I would wet the surrounding area around the kiln, it really was potentially hazardous. One spark in a breeze could carry it up and set the whole place on fire. I realized this because I was hearing in my head over and over, you could be known as the woman who burnt down Lake Montezuma, which was the town I lived in. And I kept ignoring it. And then I was getting the message, you can't do these toxic fumes anymore. I was up to my eyeballs with it, and the message was, you got to stop it. So I asked my husband, well, I told him what was going on, and he suggested, well, why don't you go into the community college and take a painter's class? And like I said, I'd never painted, and I felt very insecure about it. Like I had some kind of feeling about it that I was not comfortable, like something had happened. But anyway, I needed a new vehicle to put my creativity. So I said, okay, I'll try it. So I called them up, and they had a beginner's class, like starting, like this might have been the end of the week, that coming Monday classes were starting. And the registrar said, but you'll be number 4 on the waiting list. And I thought, well, it doesn't seem very likely I'll get in, because it's just the weekend, and 4 is a lot to drop out, 3 people to drop out. But this is the way Baba works with me. He often waits till the 11th hour. Very often, it's actually the 11th hour, 59th minute to turn the key. So, of all things, Sunday night, I get a call from the school. Are you still interested in the painting class? So I showed up on Monday. I got into the painting class. And this was the only painting class I ever took at this local college. And the interesting thing was, this woman was a very good artist, but she didn't instruct, because she had gotten so influenced by doing a workshop of an artist she liked that came to Sedona, and she studied with this person that for a year she said her artwork was completely off because she had lost her voice. She was so busy emulating this other artist she admired. So she would lecture and show slides, but never demonstrate. And then she would say, okay, go home and paint whatever you want to paint, and just incorporate what we talked about. And I did this, and I discovered there was an artist inside. I mean, it wasn't like I was channeling some knowledge or something. I did have an innate sense, and I was not a rank beginner, but it took a lot of concentration. And I could feel I was really being worked on while I was doing this. But the first week, actually, she hadn't talked about painting. She kept talking about materials, and I thought, well, what a waste. And I was chomping at the bit, ready to do something. And I went up to her and said, well, what should I do till Monday? And she said, go home and paint. But she hadn't said a word about painting. And I had this complex about it. But nevertheless, I went home, and I had bought some canvas boards, and I had a photograph of some beautiful purple, velvety purple pansies in my garden. So that's what I painted. And I tell you, when I started to paint it, I noticed like a million shades of green I had never noticed before. It was suddenly my eyes were open, and I had to figure out how to mix colors and and get all these shades of green. It was very interesting. It turned out very nice. My husband said it was one of his favorite paintings of mine. So anyway, this was going on every week. We could paint whatever we wanted, and I would paint landscapes and still lifes and this and that, my animals. And then on the 10th week, I decided I was going to paint Baba. And I had what I used was a photograph of Baba at Myrtle Beach, and he's in his sadra. And it's really a lovely picture of him in a nice composition. And what would happen is when we came in on Monday, we'd put all that we had done on leaning in the chalk rack, and people would critique kindly, but it was like an open critique. And when they got to mine, and now these are all these mostly retirees. This is like a non-credit class, I think, and very nice folks, but I don't think any of them had anything other than traditional religious connections. But when they saw this painting of Baba, they were really moved, and they commented how special it was, and that was very encouraging to me. Even while I was a student during these 10 weeks, I had gotten into a local gallery, not in Sedona, mind you, because you get la creme de la creme of artists there, but in where the school was, there was a gallery. And I thought my husband really wanted me, to maybe be in the gallery and sell paintings that way. But he wouldn't push me. We didn't do that. And I thought about what did I really want to paint. I wasn't going to be painting that much. And what I wanted to paint, no doubt, was Baba. So that's what I did. I painted Baba. And I got to be on fire painting Baba. And one of the things that I'd done when I moved to Arizona was that I started selling books on eBay. It was a way to get to know Arizona. I'd go to yard sales. Anyway, when I started doing the Baba paintings, I posted them on an internet site. It wasn't a selling gallery. It was just a collection of photographs of my Baba paintings. And then I was selling these books on eBay. And one day I had a Baba book I sold because although I had a copy of this book, I spaced out and I ordered another copy. And I was selling this second one. And when the auction was won, I send out a congratulations, you won the auction. And I get a reply back, and it's from Rick Chapman, who says, who won the auction. He said, do you remember me? I met you in India. And I said, of course I do. And we had met. We hadn't really hung out a lot, but I mean, it was cordial, and we knew who each other was. And it comes to the point where he asks me, well, what have you been doing since I last saw you? So I tell him I've been painting Baba. And he says, well, I'd like to see him. So I tell him where he can go look at these photos. And for a second, I have a flash. He's going to look at him and come back and say, I really like him. I want to buy him. That's exactly what he did. He came back and said, I want to buy him. And what developed over time, and he really got my art, was that he suggested that instead of making auctions, why didn't I just let him know when I finished a painting? And, the size and the cost, and they were very inexpensive. I was not doing this to make money. And I was working small because I've always been like a small group, one-to-one kind of person. And I like the intimacy of small paintings. I just did. That was my comfort zone. I mean, I painted a large one once just to do it, and it came out fine, but I wasn't comfortable. So he developed into what during the Renaissance time would have been my patron. And he would make jokes about the Katie Rhodes wing and that he was going to open a museum because he had had the foresight after he met Baba that he should start collecting Baba memorabilia while the energy was so strong, because it wouldn't always be like that. You know, it would end up being 2 and 3 generations removed from Baba. So he had this collection, but I don't think it ever happened that he did make it public. But he did acquire most all of my paintings. And like I said, I was on fire. I would finish a painting, and it was very intense meditation for me, especially with Baba's eyes. It was so important for me to get the eyes right. And I would do something and I'd look and then I'd correct it, and the eyes, the eyes. And um, I did get better over time, even though right from the beginning, there were decent likenesses. But the amazing thing that happened was some of these paintings actually had Baba's energy. And I can't tell you how that happens, the alchemy of that, because there are a lot of very beautiful likenesses that to me are kind of flat when it comes to energy. And yet Baba had done this. I certainly had nothing to do with it. And I was amazed at this process because other people had this experience. Not in all of them, not all the people, and not all the paintings, but it was there, and it was like, wow, I don't know how I got so blessed. And this went on for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. And I suddenly knew that it was ending. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. And I started getting a lot of information through pictures. And I noticed that it was like there was a bar graph I was seeing, and it was like a bell jar. My interest had gone to the maximum point, and now I was on the downward slope. And all I could do was watch it happen. And I wasn't upset about it. I was just an observer. And when I painted the portrait of Baba, I knew it was my last portrait. And it was. And I painted one more after that one, which was a picture of the ocean with a pink sky and a beautiful backlit wave. And that to me was like, Baba is the ocean of love. And it was very curious to me that I was so unemotional about this. And I realized that that was because I had a sense of completion. I felt like I had finished sanskarically whatever I needed to do. And I was anticipating that I would find another venue, another medium for my creativity, which never happened. And it later became clear what Baba's plan was. And where did this all happen? I'm trying to try my chronology. I knew I wouldn't be able to get it right about when Rob passed away. But he did have congestive heart failure. And he stuck around for a few more months. And during that time, instead of having the energy of 10 people, it was only 5. and um, and when he passed away, it had been a long time coming that he had physical suffering. And he never felt any resentment about it. I asked him about how he felt about all this suffering, because one of the things was he had been exposed to Agent Orange, and one of his legs was a mess, and I figured it was, affecting him systemically. And he had this recurring malaria, which is like the worst thing I've ever seen. It would get so bad that I'd have to go in to see if he was still breathing. And then he would pull a rabbit out of a hat. I don't know. I don't know how he did it. And it would take weeks before he recovered. And as he got closer to his end, the intervals between these recurring malarias got shorter and shorter. And so I knew he was ready to go because the night he dropped his body, I was actually checking on him every 10 minutes or every 15 minutes. It was the only time he asked me to leave the room. He just didn't want me to see me in the pain or whatever he was in. And I would go in and check and see. And all of a sudden he was gone. It was like the candle got blown out. And of course I was in shock. No matter how many things I knew about death, the moment of truth still shook up my life. And not just losing my partner, but my whole life, my whole life. And I kind of, I had a friend of his show up who helped me to liquidate all the stuff. My house was in foreclosure because there was a terrible recession, and what was due on the mortgage was actually more than the house was worth, the current market. And I knew that was ready to move into my next chapter. I didn't want to stay there anyway. And this friend came over, and we would fill up his little bug with stuff, and we'd go to Prescott, and there was a Native American shop and pawn shops and different things. And I liquidated a lot of stuff. And yet I was like so minimally functional because for 20 odd years, I had become more and more inward because I tried to be more of a partner with Rob in the beginning, but he was so masterful and so used to taking charge of things that I felt like I was just an encumbrance. He never complained, but I ended up deferring to him. And to me, it was really so unusual because Rob was so unusual. He actually loved the game of life, whereas I could not say that about myself. So I said, go to it. And he took care of everything. But when he died, I hadn't really been too involved with the world. And not only that, the world had changed radically in that time. And everything I had to do was like a major challenge. And this friend helped me a lot. And I'm thinking about whether to tell another story, and I'm getting no. Okay. So, so at some point, I had to vacate the premises, and I couldn't get any Bible lovers to come out west and drive my car and this and that. And I knew this fellow. I didn't know him well, but I liked him a lot. He had a very upbeat personality, really personable and very kind. And I just got a hit to ask him. And I said, I want to go, east. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to drive me out there, drive my car, and I'll pay for the motel and food, and I'll give you, X amount of money. I gave him a fair amount of money worth its time and everything. I said, and then I'll pay for a plane ticket so you can come back. And he said, sure. I said, yeah? He said, sure. Well, and he was wonderful. He was so wonderful. Um, and there was a lot of sharing in the trip. And I asked him at one point, how is it that you just said yes to do this? And he told me he was a Rosicrucian. Well, I didn't even know that Rosicrucians were still, I thought it was something from the past. I didn't know there were people still following that particular path. And he said that one of the things we do is we help people where we can. Somebody needs help, we help them. So I was kind of set on going straight to Asheville. And I had checked with friends, is this a good decision? I checked with my higher guidance. Yes, yes, yes. And oh, it's going to be full of light and ease, and it's going to be a wonderful new chapter. And anyway, this friend who's driving me out, and he was such a confident, good driver, just put the GPS on and off we went. I was telling him about Bob and stuff, and I mentioned Prague, and he said, well, let's stop at Prague. And I said, you want to go to Prague? I thought he wouldn't be interested. And I didn't want to kind of make that detour if he was anxious to get back. No, he said, I'd like to see it. So we went to Prague and we spent the night in Prague. And then it was a perfectly smooth, uneventful trip. The car was fine. And this Baba lover had said I could stay at her place, but only for a limited amount of time, not very long at all, because she had promised it to somebody else at a certain date. So at least it was, a point uh, to begin to find my way and accommodations and stuff. And I told her that, I was coming and that I had this male friend who drove me and could he stay at her house. And she was very reluctant to have this guy she didn't know stay in the house. But she said, well, just bring him over, we'll see, we'll see what happens. So he comes, and after a little while, she whispers to me, oh, he can stay as long as he wants. He's wonderful. So Bob is really helping me all the way along, I mean, he made a tough situation as good as it could be. And, I thought it was going to be this smooth segue, but it turns out that there was a lot of heavy karma that got attended to. And I didn't feel comfortable there, and I went into free fall because I was used to Myrtle Beach and people. There was a big community in Asheville. My experience of Asheville at that time was that everybody had their private little life in their homes, and I was just somebody passing through. I went to the meetings, but I didn't feel invited into people's lives. Nobody said, let's have tea and let's go on a hike. And I was really feeling very isolated and unconnected. And I kind of landed in free fall where I just was losing it, and life was getting really hard. I started to get very anxiety ridden. I'd never had such a thing. And to make a long story short, Baba never stopped piling things on. That's all I can tell you. I'll tell you one thing. I had said to Baba before the trip, I never ask you for specifics, and I really try not to because I figure what I desire is from my ego and false self, and Baba knows what's best. But in this case, I said, when I get there, I would really like to have just a little piece of land and light in the apartment because light's very important to me. Every single place I stayed in was actually subterranean. Most of it was below street level or somebody's basement and damp and and there was no place to plant a flower or anything. And I was going through all this stuff that was very spiritual, but it felt like psychological. I didn't know what was going on. And I was like full of this anxiety and PTSD, it seemed, because the anxiety just kept firing. And I'd been a really pretty competent person, I thought, most of my life. And I was really helpless with whatever was going on. And and as I said, there was some heavy duty with some people, and I think that was the main reason that I got free of that, which I did completely uh, through unusual circumstances. I did get quite free of that. I had to give this woman some money that she wasn't legally entitled to. But I realized that if I didn't, I would be carrying her and her energy in my head, possibly for years. And and it was not pretty. And I decided, okay, I would just write her the check. And I tell you this because when I wrote the check, and she had been kind of threatening, so I decided I wanted to move on. So I wrote her this check for a sizable amount of money. And when she left and I walked to my car, I suddenly felt like skipping. It was like, forget all the stress and anxiety and the PTSD. It was like, oh my God, I was so happy and so light. And I said to Bob, is that all it takes to balance the books karmically? Is to write a check? No amount of money would have been too much for the instant freedom I had. And then I met her at a music sahabas. And I tell you this because it was amazing. The whole experience, and it had gone on for, months, was so out of my being and my field that I started to walk over to her and I was going to give her a big hug. And she saw me and she turned away, and I realized, oh my God, she's not free at all. She's still carrying that around. So, anyway, that was part of the thing. At one point, I needed to find yet again another place to live. And I decided that I could not make Asheville my home. I couldn't put roots there. It didn't feel right, but it was very important that I had gone there, no doubt about it. And I thought I would move back to Myrtle Beach almost by default, because here in the state that I was in a place I wasn't familiar with, and I was having to navigate mountain roads with my GPS. I mean, I'm really half out of my body. And I even had a car accident on the way to a Baba meeting. Once a week I'd play cards with the ladies, and I was a normal person. It was so funny. And then I go back to all this other stuff. But anyway, I started writing to, I forget, like Baba Talk, the local community bulletin where you can communicate with people in Asheville. And I kept saying that I'd like to share a ride to Myrtle Beach, and I would pay half expenses and stuff. Well, people are going from Asheville back and forth all the time. I could not get a response from one person. And I chalked it all up to Baba all the time. I knew Baba was in charge, and I just couldn't believe it because it was like I couldn't get any relief. I was like in this walk through hell. I was having this major dark night of the soul. And every time I would say, Baba, I can't believe you just did that, and added one more thing, he would respond by adding something new. And I'd go, oh no. And guess what? It just kept happening. So I can't believe that I can't get somebody to say, yeah, you can share the ride with me to Myrtle Beach. But I knew it would happen when it was the right time. And it took 4 months, 4 months. And then a friend of mine from Myrtle Beach, who was living in Nashville, said, of course you can come with me. I'm going to go during Silence Day weekend. So I got a reservation, stayed in the guest house, which is always my place. Thank you, Baba. And there's that gathering at the barn before Silence Day. And afterwards, everybody's kind of mingling. And I hadn't been to the center, for really a long time, years. I think I'd had 2 trips in the 20 years I was away. Because my husband wasn't a Baba lover, and it meant being away for a week. So I'd done it twice, but I wasn't like around a lot, and I didn't go to India. And so Jane Brown comes up, and Jane and I had been friends, and she'd also been a client. And she says, oh, so what are you doing these days? And I said, well, I'm thinking about moving to Myrtle Beach. And out of her mouth comes the most outrageous thing. this is Baba over the top again when he wants me to get a message. Jane says, "Oh, of course you should. It's what we've all been waiting for." Now, if I can know anything, it's that nobody was waiting for me to return to Myrtle Beach. Nobody. This was Baba saying, using Jane as a mouthpiece. So I got the message. So then this fellow that I had met on one of the trips who had a Sufi background at one point, he comes up and asks, "Hi, what's going on?" And I tell him I'm thinking about moving to Myrtle Beach, but I don't know how to do it logistically. And he says, "I'll make it happen." And I went, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, I'll make it happen." So, we talked about it and that I would come down at the end of the month. He'd come up to where I was, and we'd head back to Myrtle Beach. And in the meantime, during that trip, I'd also met a Baba lover, I think by the original kitchen, and we were talking, and he told me he had a house down in Myrtle Beach, and he would let Baba lovers stay on the top floor who came into town while they were looking for their own place to stay. So, and he said I could stay there. And when I got back to Asheville, I wrote him to confirm it, and I got a confirmation and all that. But after a while, and he had been very active on Facebook, he was not there. There was no presence of this person, and I'm thinking, I wonder if he got sick. What happened to him? And it was getting close to when I was supposed to move, and I'd already told my landlady that I was moving out, so she had taken money from the next people. So I essentially had no wiggle room. She had committed the room, and I had to leave. So I write to this guy an email, and I leave a phone message, and he finally calls me back, and he says, "Did I tell you you could stay in the house? I don't have any room for you." Now we're approaching the 11th hour here pretty fast, and I don't have any other options. And I didn't get mad at this guy. I got mad at Baba because I knew this guy was just a pawn. He was just part of this drama that Baba was creating. And maybe he was having a senior moment, whatever he had. It wasn't going to help. So I didn't get mad at him. But I just couldn't believe what Baba had done. And and I'm sitting there just stuck. I don't know what to do. And then my landlady, I don't know, she was a Baba person. I don't know if she was a Baba lover, but she certainly had connections with Baba, said to me, "Well, why don't you call the center, see if you can stay at the center?" And I don't remember what time of the year it was and what events were happening, but I said, "Sure." And there's going to be a spot for me, when, you know, the place had to be full to capacity. But I called. What was I going to do? And this woman, a friend, I tell her that I'm looking to see if I can stay on the center for a couple of weeks. And she says very apologetically, like, "Oh, I'm sorry, this is all I have, but I can offer you the guest house." And I go, "The guest house?" "Yes." I mean, it's the only, it was so funny. It's the only place I ever wanted to stay. So I got booked into the guest house. So then this guy who's going to help me move, he comes up with his wife, and my belongings are all in valises and boxes on the lawn. We are now at the 11th hour, 59th minute. And this fellow says to me in the course of conversation, "Oh, I don't drive other people's cars ever." And I said, excuse me? I mean, I hadn't driven for, I mean, the idea of driving a 6.5 hour trip when I'm feeling okay is challenging, but here I am, anxiety ridden and PTSD and half out of my body, and I'm going to have to drive 6.5 hours. And I literally freak and just kind of wilt in front of them because I can't believe Baba has done this. So they say to me that they're going to go to Chai Pani for lunch, and did I want to come? And then afterwards, we'd head out on the road. So I said, no, thank you. The last thing I wanted to do was make polite small talk in the state I was in. So they left. And I did, through some grace, I was watching what happened, and I saw from their point of view that this couple had come up out of the kindness of their heart to help me. And now they had this woman who was a total basket case to deal with. And I felt like they didn't deserve that. And somehow I was going to pull myself together. I didn't know how, but I was going to do this because I didn't want to do that to them. So I go into the house and I'm meditating, and I don't know what I'm doing at all, except trying to, I guess, quiet myself and get to a calm center place. And when I came out, he told me later that he bent down and whispered to his wife, "It's okay, don't worry about it." And he saw all this light coming out of my head, and he knew everything would be okay. So we pack up the car, and my plan is I'm not going to take my eyes off his bumper and license plate. Nothing's going to come between me and that. And I can't read a map and drive. I can't do any. And the biggest problem was actually that on a practical level was that I have this low blood sugar and I have to eat all the time to keep my blood sugar up. Otherwise, I can't focus and concentrate. And I was just snacking. And at one point, I felt like I was really getting into the red zone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to tell you this one thing that happened. So I get in the car and we take off, and I'm not driving more than, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. And that little voice in my head again says, you shouldn't use who you were as the reference for who you are because you're not that person anymore. And I think, oh, this is very nice, but my experience of myself is not that, really. And I said, okay, and I was in New York. I knew how to drive, and so I just focused on what I had to do. But I thought I kept in mind what I heard. I thought that was pretty interesting. And like I said, they didn't want to stop for meals, so I had to survive on these snacks. And what's happening is that I'm getting really hot and unfocused, but I'm doing okay. Although if I had my druthers, at some point my body insists on having fiber and bulk in order to get balance. But when I finally saw the signs for entering Myrtle Beach, it was like I could almost hear this trumpet voluntary announcing, "She did it! She did it!" And I drove in and I stayed at their house that night. And in the morning, they drove me to the center, and I unpacked in the guest house. And I saw the brilliance of what Baba had done by making me drive, because I did become a different. I was aware that I was different. I would never have known that I could do that. Baba kept pushing my limits. Somehow he knew that I could survive, maybe not gracefully and easily, but he knew that he kept pushing it. And I would just go, oh no, but somehow I would manage. And then it was the next, oh no. And And here I am. I had driven to Myrtle Beach. That was amazing. And so in the morning, now I have to face getting groceries. And the anxiety is coming up again. And I said, Katie Rose, are you kidding? You just drove from Asheville. You can drive to Kroger's. So, I had trepidation getting back on Highway 17. Highway 17, for those who don't know, has at that time it was known as the most dangerous highway in the country. Either it had the most fatalities or the most accidents, but it was not a well-designed highway. But I knew I could be careful and I'd get to Kroger's and come back. And sure enough, I did that. And step by step, I started to put my life together because I started to see the light at the end of the tunnel a little bit. And one of the reasons, and that had been absent, one of the reasons that I wanted to go to Myrtle Beach was that I knew it. I had lived there for 5 or 6 years already. And because I could get all the services I needed in a very limited journey up and down Highway 17. And I knew that I could manage that. And that was going to be my safety zone, my comfort place. And and then I had a bunch of experiences that were very challenging, more of this karmic finishing up, my God, with roommates and landladies. Um, and at one point, I was living in a place very near the center, and I kept hearing that I should stop doing massage. And I thought about it, and I got that it would be okay to do energy work, but people really, for the most part, they like the physical touch. And my practice had been very successful. And the way I did massage was to leave myself outside the door and become a clear and open channel for Baba, for the divine to come through. Because that higher wisdom knew much more than I did. And and it was hard to let go of that because, I was good at it. My practice was helping people. Um, and the income was, just enough that I didn't have to dip in my savings. I could cover my rent and my insurance and blah, blah. So then I start to notice piece by piece that I'm also losing abilities, that I can't see as well as I used to, and my hands are hurting. One day I wake up and my hands are excruciatingly painful. And I'd been doing massage, for 30 years? Deep work. And I hadn't listened, so Baba made it so that I couldn't continue. I just couldn't continue. And then my eyesight started going. And and it was mostly with the eye I had a cataract operation on. And so, and I don't like going to medical doctors. I've been a very alternative person and survived very happily on herbs and energy medicine and things like that. And Baba's my divine physician. So, but these things are happening, and I'm a little surprised. I'm not freaking out, but I'm noticing, that old age is showing up, and uh, and it's a little disconcerting because I wonder where it's heading. And then that little voice talks to me again, and it says, "So, did you think you would be exempt?" And I was so nailed because I did think I would be exempt, because I had this little scenario plan that I was going to be vital and energetic until it was my time to go. And then I would lay my head down on a pillow and my spirit and soul would leave, and that was it. Well, not so. I was not exempt. I was not exempt. And And this kind of kept progressing. And I don't know what year this is, but um, oh, anyway, I want to mention something I think that's very useful. Uh, it was for me. Um, when I started to come out of what was apparently a dark night of the soul, and and I was really distressed that Baba was not there to comfort me in any way whatsoever. I mean, I knew he wasn't absent. I kept talking to him, but he was keeping an eye, but practically speaking, I was feeling abandoned, I guess, because it was so painful. And and that took a while to heal. Because my heart was really kind of a wreck. I'd had some shocks after Rob died, not just Rob, and my heart was sort of mincemeat. And instead of getting the healing I thought I would by moving to Asheville, it just exacerbated everything. And and I had been attracted to The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, and I don't know how that really happened. I later came to know that Mickey Singer, as he's called, is actually very well aware of Baba. And in one of his books, he has Baba's picture right as the frontispiece on the chapter on love. And then I heard that he contributes a great amount of money every year to the center. Anyway, uh, it was ridiculous in the state I was in to try to read a book like that. But I had brought it with me from Asheville. And then my life started to show me what my life had changed to and why I had gone through that dark night of the soul. Uh, and after a while, that voice said to me again, and I wouldn't hear from it for months, intervals, in the interim. But it said to me, you can't have a dark night of the soul if somebody is holding your hand. And I got that. It really is a solo walk. It's a walk through hell, and you feel disconnected from everything, including God. But you get cracked wide open and rearranged potentially. And what I started to see as these pieces got put back together, because it was only through living that I could see, oh, this is different. That isn't how I used to react. I realized that I had been very externally oriented. I was busy being a good Baba lover, and everything I read from Baba did have an ease and truth to it that it just went into like my soul, which wasn't true about other things I read. Nothing would say. But what I was doing, and I realized it was a survival mechanism, I was sort of like, well, Baba says, and Baba says, and Baba says, and I was applying these things like rigid principles instead of being really in the moment and discerning what the high road was in the moment. And that's what happened. My consciousness flipped 180 degrees from being completely externally oriented and, to me, really kind of missing the boat. What was I doing all this time? To completely internally oriented. I never really, I mean, I've been introspected, but it was all psychological. Now I was meeting this interior landscape, and when things would happen, instead of applying some blanket truth, I would ask. I would say, well, what is the high road? What would love do? And I would get something that was very specific. And it always had very good feeling to it. It wasn't always easy. And I had had a dream once I don't know where this fits in, to tell the truth, where love came to me in a dream and asked if I would like to be her student. And I said, sign me up, sign me up. And then my life changed. My life changed completely. And I had always felt connected to Rumi, but I didn't like reading Rumi's poems, as beautiful as they were, because I felt bereft that I didn't have those experiences. I really wanted to have that kind of profound mystical love and things like that. But after that dream with love and signing up as one of her students, my life changed, and my life actually became a Rumi poem. And I was like Majnun. I was completely taken over by this tsunami of love in my heart. And then after some of the shocks that ensued, my heart got really protected. But I had this period where I was taking a very deep dive into Rumi, and I wasn't really thinking about Baba. I hadn't severed connections, but he was not, like, at this period, the central focus of my life. And one day, because I was really absorbed in this Rumi business, so one day I sort of turned to Baba. I could sense he was behind me, like he still had my back. And I said, well, I'm not thinking about you the way I did for all these decades. And I'm wondering what you think about that. And he beams. He makes the sign of perfection and twinkles at me. And all I can say is that Baba has always been kind and very patient. I've never felt anything but that from him, this really sweet care and love from him. And what I heard from Baba was that he gives me a long leash, is what I want to say. Baba said, Rumi is your teacher. He is on loan to you, and I am your master. Well, okay. So that went on for a long time. I don't know, months, a year or something. And then all these physical things were happening. And at some point, when was it? I think COVID was already happening. I really got the message to move out of Myrtle Beach. And I kept asking Baba, is that what you want? Is that what you want? Yes, yes. And it got to the point where I felt like it was my soul saying, this is not negotiable. You need to move. And yeah, COVID had already started. How I know that is because I was looking at my computer and I noticed that there was a poetry challenge, a free week that was offered. And I had never really written much poetry, maybe once or twice in my life, but I had been a friend of writing. I had done a little bit of memoir writing, and I had done a lot of stream of consciousness writing as a way to access things that were buried. It was like a healing tool for me. So I signed up for this poetry challenge because, everybody was, our activities in ordinary lives were so curtailed, and this was a nice thing to get involved with. And long story short, this course was designed to help women find their authentic voice. There was no teaching. The woman who set it up was a certified yoga teacher and meditation teacher, as well as an accomplished writer. And it attracted a really wonderful bunch of women. While the whole world was freaking out about COVID, this was an oasis of peace and caring. And I never heard anybody in all the time, and it probably was a year or two, who said anything even critical towards anybody else. And I started this course, and and people had the option of posting it. What would happen is that the teacher would give these prompts. We would do a little bit of mind body stuff. First we would do some pranayama. We would get into the moment and clear. She'd read some poetry, um, which I always liked what she picked. She picked a lot of Rumi and Mary Oliver. And then we would write, and she encouraged us to not even edit it, just write what was ever in our minds and be free, and then work on it later. And so it became this tool for inner exploration in a very safe environment where people really encouraged you and gave, a lot of praise for digging deep. Not everybody, but a lot of people did. And I loved having that focus during that time. And sometimes I would work on the poems and stuff, but I really didn't get much recognition. There were some people that were getting all these little hearts all the time. And I discovered in myself some really shocking, what I consider almost shameful things, because I thought I was a strong, liberated woman. And what I found was like this little wounded bird with a broken wing that was desperate for those little red hearts. Can you believe it? To see some kind of approval from other people in recognition, and I traced it back, and I saw that it was my survival mechanism, because I always felt so out of place on this planet and with mainstream, and had my radar out. And by excelling in what was being asked, what people liked, it was a way of fitting in and also staying under the radar. But it shocked me to see that. Really, it brought tears to my eyes. It was like, oh my God. But I kept writing, and I kept going deeper and deeper, and I knew I had to stop and grow out of this, that I wanted to write for myself. And it was like stepping out of my safety zone over and over and over. But I kept doing it. And every time I did it, I could feel Baba there. He was really supporting me. I mean, everything had changed once I wasn't in, my free fall going through that. Baba was there. And I kept going deeper and deeper. I want to get back to Mickey and the untethered soul, but I'm going to finish this. I hope I remember. Somebody remind me. and at one point, something changed. It was like suddenly I was in the springtime of this, what I call soul excavation. I was really getting down to some deep stuff, and I was seeing a lot of knots inside me get untied, and a lot of space being created. And I'd had no idea all of these boulders I was carrying around. But every time I would step out of my safety zone, there would be such rewards for it that I was so encouraged to keep doing it. And most incredible to me was that I started getting these private messages from women in the group that what I had written was really helpful to them, that it had served as some inspiration, a model, new options, a new point of view, whatever it was. And I was so touched that anything that I had done was making a difference to somebody's, and their heart or their soul was positively affected. And I said that to Baba. I said, this is amazing. What started out as a self-help tool, because I really needed some help, has become a way to serve other people. And thank you for that blessing. I mean, it really still brings tears to my eyes, because if anything gives me personal pleasure, it is being able to touch somebody in that meaningful kind of way. So I was writing and writing, and then I decided I'm really getting brave because I'm turning into this yes person I've never been. I had also started hearing, come out of hiding, come out of hiding, come out of hiding. And I was very tentative about this. I was really um, still full of stuff, and I was staying under the radar. But I was getting encouragement and good feedback. So I started to turn into this yes person, meaning that every time an opportunity would show up, I would step up to the plate. And it didn't mean I didn't have butterflies or adrenaline racing through me, but I was willing. I was so eager to get free spiritually, to become the divine person, the being I was, that Baba says we all are, that I would just keep stepping up to the plate, and I kept growing. And as I did that, my relationship with Baba kept getting more intimate and beautiful. And I'm going to tell you the Mickey thing here and then come back. I started after I went through the dark night of the soul. I started to feel after I was back in Myrtle Beach for a while that at a certain point maybe I was losing it and spiraling down again. And I kind of panicked, like, oh God, I'm not healed yet from that one. I can't go through another void and, you know, cracking open thing. I'm just not ready for it. And I tried to read, as I said, I took down the book again, and because my eyesight was so bad, it took me about a half hour to read the first paragraph, and I said, okay, I guess I can't read it. And I just accepted it and I put it on the shelf. The next morning, I'm in the what my routine had become that I had stopped listening to all the news. I unplugged because the collective fear and stuff was just like I didn't want to start my day with that. So because I had a very peaceful place about it, I knew that Bob and the Perfect Masters were in charge, and I knew that all this clearing was absolutely necessary, that you couldn't build a new humanity on a rotten foundation, as much suffering as that was. But I was not caught up in this craziness. And so I stopped listening, and what I would do is I'd bring my phone down and plug it into an external speaker, and I'd listen to music or, a podcast, something that was uplifting, meaningful. And this morning, after I couldn't read the Untethered Soul, I do that and I click on something. I don't know what it was. But after a few minutes, I noticed that nothing has come on. And so I go back to my phone and figure I got to click it again. It didn't connect. And there on the screen of my phone is the audio version of The Untethered Soul. Oh my God, I didn't know such a thing existed. I had never put even his name in my search box. And it's the audio version read by the author. And the reason I was so interested was that I knew enough about him that when I felt like I was losing my grip, I know that his spirituality is very practical. And I had liked that about it. It was like dealing with the moment and getting yourself out of patterns that were really full of self-created suffering. It was very clear to me. And because I just felt Baba guided me. He guided me to that. It was never like I was looking for another teacher. Baba was the one without a second. But it was like the Rumi thing. There was learning and experiences that need to go on at certain time. So anyway, I just couldn't believe it. I said to Baba, you're running the whole universe, and you can come and fill in this detail in this moment for this little soul. And I felt so loved and taken care of. It was just remarkable.
Katie.
Yeah.
All right, I just want to let you know that we have about 15 minutes before the next program.
Okay, I'm just going to skip a lot of stuff, and I'm going to go to common time, modern times. At one point,
No. It's better that we comment like last time.
I
And
can't hear you. I can't hear you, sweetie. Translate that, Betty, loud for me.
Nicole, she says she's is the leader of the next program. She says, please just have some comments.
Bless your soul. Okay, so I will skip forward. At one point, I started to really feel like I was dying physically, that I was going to drop my body. Actually, more than one time, because it turns out that when you're having a big change in consciousness, it is a death. It's a death to your old self, and I didn't know how to translate it any way other than that I was physically dying. Plus, I had the support of seeing all these pieces of me dropping away. And it was very confusing to me because when I would ask Baba, am I couldn't get a straight answer. I couldn't be objective, obviously. And and once I kept asking the same question, I knew I'd never get a straight answer because I was mucking up the communication lines by asking over and over again. So anyway, I have a friend who works with Baba in a way that she is in constant communication with him, and she hears very clear messages and directives about what to do. And she's made herself very available to work with Baba. And I could see over my own experiences with her and Baba that I trust her. And I don't have time actually to go into all of that. But at this point, I went to her and I said, could you just ask Baba whether I'm really dropping the body or not? And she said, yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that later. I'll take some time. And then in the next second, she says, oops, wait a minute, Bob is here and he's got a message for you. So she goes off the mic for a minute and comes back and she says, Mayor Baba says, Katie Rose is, this is verbatim, because I didn't want to mess it up, so I know what he said to her. Katie Rose is not dropping her body anytime soon, her physical body anytime soon. She is dying to her old self to be reborn as a new self dedicated to myself. Now that to me sounds like Baba 100%. And from where I was standing, it seemed very remote because I had been on this kind of, I was searching out, of all things, some of the New Age stuff. And I think it was before I healed about my feeling abandoned by Baba. Because they were throwing around words like empowerment and sovereignty. And it was very useful that I did that because I discovered I wasn't interested at all. It was one of these netty. No, I'm not this, I'm not that. I don't want to hear transmissions from beings from faraway planets. I don't want to, I mean, that's all fine and dandy, but I knew it was also all Maya. And I was really interested in Baba, and it always rang as truth. From the first time I started reading Baba, especially the discourses, I experienced the authority of Baba. He wasn't on the path. He was realizing, he was just telling you how it is. Now you take it or leave it, do what you want. There was this incredible ability to describe particular topics from every facet in the most comprehensive way with a brilliant choice of words that was so accessible and yet so perfect. So I had this sense of Baba, but still it was sanskarically driven. I felt it, and Baba let me do this to kind of use up these sanskars. At least that's a story I told myself. I don't know anything, so I don't know if it's true, but that's what it felt like. And I said to my friend, I said, well, from where I stand, that sounds beautiful, but it seems pretty remote that I would go from where I am to that kind of ardent life dedicated, because, well, that was just my feeling. Anyway, life changed completely. Baba started reeling me in, but he is so subtle and adroit at what he does that I didn't even know I was hooked. he just kept pulling me in. It was like pulling me through the ocean, closer and closer to him. And what I did feel was that I could feel Baba's nazar 24/7. And it was almost like there was a sun lamp on me. There was this light and warmth behind me, and Baba had my back. And I never had this feeling of being so protected and guided and loved and just under his sweet care all the time, all the time. And one day, and like I said, he gave me courage and strength because, of his presence and guidance and love. And so I kept saying yes more and more, which increased my closeness to him and the opening of my own self, so that I'm not even remotely the person I used to be. Not in any sense whatsoever. All these boulders I've been carrying around are absolutely gone. So many times I would say yes to something that had been a big knot, and it was like the Gordian knot. In 1 second of saying yes, the issue was like out of my whole field. It was finished after a lifetime, things like that. And I started having a lot of Baba dreams. And I'd had dreams before, but they were widely spaced apart. And it took years before I had a dream in which I felt like I actually had Baba's darshan. And that changed a lot. Baba asked me to do something that ordinarily I wouldn't have been willing to do because it was potentially embarrassing and humiliating. And when he asked me to do this thing in the dream, without hesitation, I said, yes, Baba. And I was willing to do that, even though I knew it was going to be a horrible fiasco and my pride and ego was going to be really humiliated. And Baba didn't make me do it. He called me up to him. He was like on the stage. It was in the barn, and the barn was looking like kind of a combination of the meeting place and the barn. And he had me come up to him, and he took my hand, and he said, I am very pleased with you. Everything will turn out fine. And, it was like Baba, he knew what I was going through inside, but I didn't give him any apologies, any backstory. I simply obeyed and said, yes, Baba, and he was so happy. And I felt like something really changed. And I had that same willingness that kept me going all the time, was to really, as much as I could, try to live up to my highest ideals of truth. And being connected with Sufis had really taught me a lot, because there was so much emphasis on, and Baba said this too in those Hafiz quotes that he left for us. If the master asks you to chop off your head, you don't ask how or why. And that had really been instilled in me. So unlike many Westerners, I really got obedience, and I didn't hesitate. It could be really scary, but I would say yes, or I would certainly try to say yes. So anyway, at this point, more contemporary, modern, current time, I'm starting to have a lot of dreams, and I'm having this like wonderful time with Baba. I've never had this kind of intimacy and protection and sweet, sweet care. And one of the first dreams I had, and this is actually like in a 2 or 3 month period, this recent, I'm in a room where there's a social happening, but I'm in this room where a lot of the people are Baba people are in another room. and I'm in a room where there's a couple at the end of the sofa where Baba is sitting, but he's at the other end of the sofa. And I have pulled my armchair to be as close to Baba as I can be. So this couple is on one side, and Baba and I are very close on the other side. And this woman says very loud, kind of, she says to this guy, you know, we were worried about you. We thought we might have to put you in an institution, but you're doing much better now. And he's just sitting there listening to this, and I'm thinking, what? But it's not my business. And then Baba leans over and starts explaining to me. And our heads are almost touching. We're having this tete-a-tete that is so intimate. And he's explaining that this guy, it's like he was so full of love. He said he would kiss every fingertip with love, and these sparks of love would come out. And then he was explaining something with his using his palm, and we were leaning real close. And that was the end of the dream, but the takeaway was enormous because Baba was not in his sadra. He was in Western clothes, and he might have had short hair or his hair was pulled back. But I knew who he was, but he was relating to me as a companion, but not just a companion. We were best friends. It was not that he was my best friend only. We were old best friends, and we knew each other and had the kind of ease and understanding that you can only get from being with somebody you know so well and you trust, and you've had a lot of that kind of experience with. So
Rosa, this is a very good place to stop because it's a beautiful dream and beautiful image. And there is 4 more minutes to the next program.
Okay.
So
I would just say that what Baba was doing was removing, he conveyed this to me, removing the formality of worshiping Baba, where he was on a pedestal. He didn't want that anymore. This was part of the new life. And we had this ease, and it was mind-blowing. It was a whole new layer to my experience with Baba. Okay.
That was very beautiful. Very beautiful. So anyone want to say any comments? I saw smiles and I saw many people listening. And
then I will just pick up and share a few more very powerful dreams, and that'll conclude it. Really, I don't think
no, you can't, because there won't be any time, because the next program is coming in within 3 minutes.
Oh, yes, I have no problem with that. I'm just telling people it's not going to be another long 2-3 hour kind of thing. It's just going to be a few very poignant dreams.
Next
Okay,
time.
so
Part 3. Part 3.
Betty, you will
And thank you, all of you. Oh, I'm so happy that you're here to share and feel your love and support.
Rosa, I, for one, I am thrilled with all of your detail, your life story. I feel like you're just, you're a template for, for venturing in this new phase of,
Thank you. You wouldn't believe I had to edit out some of the stories. But I always put Baba in charge. I say, please take over, and Baba does such a wonderful job. So this is what he wanted.
Thank you. You have a chance to put it in next time. So
yeah.
Betty, I see you smiling. Yeah. You want to share?
Well, I just did. I thanked her.
No, not you. The other Betty.
Oh, sorry.
the other Betty. I am beaming with gratitude.
All I can say is that at this point, I'm in a constant state of wonderment to how my life has turned around. Oh, I know I do have to talk about the isolation and that was a masterful move on Baba's part. Okay.
Rosa, are you hearing Betty's comment?
No, Betty is in the middle of saying.
But Rosa, are you hearing her speak?
Can
Are
you
you
hear
hearing?
me, Rosa?
Are you?
I'm hearing you, okay, yeah.
How about
Okay.
Betty? Because she's saying some wonderful things. Other Betty, are you
Do you-
hearing that?
Do you
I
hear
didn't
me?
hear any of it, no.
Okay, you say
Oh.
it and I'll translate. It's two Bettys. We'll put it together.
I
She's
have
cool.
I have borne witness. I'm crying to this journey and your courage,
Yes.
your
Amen.
courage and perseverance.
You know, I can't really understand it. Baba must be,
Tell you.
Rosa,
Baba, you know, maybe somebody
Rosa,
could write and
Rosa,
somebody
Rosa,
could write and let me know.
Rosa, wait. Rosa, please just be quiet. Let her talk. And when you will listen to the video, you will know what she said.
I'm gonna
Just be quiet.
Mikal, I'm going to take just a minute or two of your time just to convey, because it's lovely. Betty is absolutely grateful. She's thrilled because you are talking her journey. It's the same journey, and she is so grateful and so happy that to hear you. And
Thank
yeah,
you. I got everything you said, Betty. Thank you, dear. Well, all I can say is it's my honor and privilege. Like I said, if whatever comes through touches somebody else, especially in a meaningful way, wow, it
yeah,
just brings tears to my eyes.
you sure got to the two Bettys. We're both just thrilled. We feel your journey. We feel your journey, and I think it's probably our own. Anybody else? Or we should. I think.
Rosalie was going to say something. Rosalie?
So are you going to continue next week with the last part?
Will you have
Yes.
part? I don't know if we can because
Not next week. Not next week, because next week is Mara's tea.
Maricopa, we will find a time for your part.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you, Rosa.
All right. Rosalie, did you want to say something before we move on?
I just want to say Jai Mayor Baba. And the blessing of our coming together in this way on the internet.
Absolutely. Rosalie, you're muted. Did you want to say something quickly?
Yeah, because it's about the story. All of us are telling our story. It's a little poem by very short, whenever Phyllis Frederick. Man cannot have God without telling stories. God cannot have man without creating stories. In this storytelling universe, I am only a comma. I love that because all of us as God are creating our stories, you know. And I remember I did a dance for Mara, and I danced to this piece called Mayhair. It was 3 minutes and 40 seconds. And it was Baba's birthday. And I got out and the music came on, and I thought I was on the wrong planet. I could hardly move in my mind. It was like mind attack. Why did you ask to do this? This is horrible. This is just, and I got through the dance somehow. Years later, someone, when I was talking about this painful dance, she said, that was the lightest dance I ever saw you do. So I think before we come in, especially when the avatar is here, you don't know what you're taking on, but this is the time to clean house, you know, and it's just a precious time. So when I do that, our lives are our prayer dance. That's all we have to offer. All we have. You know, whatever we do is just our offering. I mean, we can't do better. It's our being.
Thank you, Rosalie.
Yeah, Jai Baba. Yeah, thank you.
Rosa,
Get to tell this story.
Thank you, Rosa.
Jai Baba.
Baba.
Lots of love to everybody, Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
All right, let's see, I need to make you host so that you can end the program and if.
Yeah,
oh, wait,
so you're making me host, yeah?
okay, I'll stop it. Yes. Okay, stop recording. Thanks so much, Rosa. To be continued.